us with the language and tongues of your love. Amen. Please be seated. As some of you know, I spent my early 20s in Big Timber, Montana. And one afternoon, I climbed up to Crazy Mountain, which is the tallest peak in the Crazy Mountain range. And the mountains there are, at the very top, are barren. There's nothing really up there but slate. I got up to the top, looked over to the other side, and there was a massive thunderstorm coming towards me. Lightning, thunder, wind, rain. I didn't make it all the way down to the timberline and found what little shelter there was in amongst the crags. And for the next 10 years, I was absolutely terrified of thunderstorms. If you heard a rumble of thunder, you could find Jane in the closet. I would sit there and cower amongst the old shoes and the smelly laundry with the door shut. And I don't know which was worse, my fear or my embarrassment, because I was a highly functioning young lady who was fearless, except for when I heard thunder. I realized that fear kept me from the storms, in essence. Hiding away from the wind and the rain and the lightning and the everything else in the world kept me locked in a smelly old closet. So eventually I found myself crawling out of that closet, out of that fear, so that I would begin to understand and enjoy, in essence, the storms. I always now will have a fear of lightning, yes. You won't find me out in the middle of the fields. But it was that getting over that fear. In essence, that's what was going on with the disciples on the morning of Pentecost. They were in a locked door in a house by themselves praying. Since Jesus' ascension, they had been expectant of something, but they also were incredibly fearful of what was happening. They had gone from this ragtag group of disciples and followers who were fishermen and farmers and tax collectors and they had wandered around Galilee for 3 years, following Jesus of Nazareth. But then he hung on a cross. 3 days later, he began to appear to them. So there were sort of this beginning of, if you will, rumblings throughout them. What was going on? Peter began to heal people. He began to preach. They began to feel a sense of anticipation along with that fear. Jesus had promised them an advocate who would be with them after he ascended to heaven, after he went to the Father. But what was an advocate? Would it hurt? Would they know it was happening, whatever this was? So there they sat in prayer in this house. And then slowly down the street, in essence, they heard the beginning of the wind. They began to hear this storm approaching as it came sweeping down the street towards them. And soon it just blew open the windows and the doors of that house, and it blew through them. And in the chaos and the drama, they spilled out onto the streets. Everyone else heard it throughout the village, and they came out into the streets. And soon they were so alive with the Holy Spirit that it was as if their hair was caught on fire. And they found themselves preaching in different languages, and the crowds found themselves understanding the gospel of the Holy Spirit. It was the day of Pentecost, which was one of the high holy days of the Jews at the time, and it recognized the first fruits of the first spring harvest. So there were a whole bunch of people there from a whole bunch of places that didn't speak Hebrew, whatever language, or Galilean. And they heard the disciples speaking their language, their tongue. In that moment, this group of about 120 followers of Jesus of Nazareth were transformed from these bumbling outfits to what we have today. Because that Spirit not only blew through them, but went back down that street, through the alleys, throughout Jerusalem, throughout Israel, throughout the Mediterranean, caught up with the winds of Paul's sails, and went to Ephesus and Galatia and Rome and Spain. For the last 2,000 years, that Spirit has swept through us. We are a better world, we're a better people because of the power of that language of love, the power of that Holy Spirit that emboldens us to become who we are, to be better people. But what is it that the Holy Spirit has given us as a church and as a people? What are the signs of that new language that we have? Well, I see three different gifts of the Holy Spirit, if you will. One is to empower us to be advocates, to speak for those on the borderlands of the world, for the hungry, for the homeless, for the poor, for those who are victims of racism, sexism, for LGBTQIs of the world. We will be their voice, their language. We will speak in their tongue. It also causes us to go beyond our borders and broaden the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Because on that day of Pentecost, the Spirit was not going to be locked behind those doors. And instead, it blew open the doors and the windows and went everywhere. And we have followed ever since. It broadened our scope of what Christianity, what God wanted to speak to. We began to speak the language of many nations and of many people, many cultures, and many beliefs. The second, which is going to surprise you, is the gift of play. If you read the psalm, if you heard the psalm, God in His creation, in God's creation, spoke of play, the Leviathan. Who in the world would have thought of creating a Leviathan to play around in the oceans? We are called to be people of joy and play. It doesn't do the people who we speak for as advocates any disservice by being dour and somber and serious, but no, to rejoice with them and to feel the gift of life in the Holy Spirit. That sense of play and dance, that sense of joy. And the third is the gift of peace. One of Jesus' last words to the disciples was, "Peace be with you." I don't know about you, but I am very anxious about the next 4 months in our country. If our election season has been any indication, the next 4 months is going to be a time of rancor a time of criticism, a time of loud screaming voices in this country. It is an anxious time. It is a fearful time. I would like to see St. Margaret's, and this is me speaking, not everybody else. I would like to see St. Margaret's as a place of peace, a place of safety, a place where voices are no longer screaming at each other, but we're finding the common language of the Holy Spirit. We're finding things in each other of love. We're recognizing in each other the Spirit of joy, the Spirit of God. We're no longer yelling out of fear, or like me, locked in a closet somewhere in terror. If we speak the language and the tongue of love and of the Holy Spirit, then St. Margaret's will be a place and an oasis of love, where we recognize in each other that common thread, even though we differ politically in many other different ways. Here will be the still waters, the green pastures. Here will be a place where we're not going to be yelling at each other, where we can take a deep breath and breathe in the Holy Spirit and trust everything will be all right. That sounds like a miracle to me. But it is what we are empowered to believe, that with the power of the Holy Spirit, just as this country was founded on that belief, so we will continue in that belief. I found that now, many years from now, when I was in my early 20s, that I love storms. I love carefully standing out there, seeing the wind and the chaos and the rain going by and the thunder. And then what I really love is the peace that follows a storm like that, where softly you can hear the rain on the streets, but you can hear the softness that follows a storm. May St. Margaret's be the place that follows after a storm with the gentle peace of the Holy Spirit, the language of love.